Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, peoples.
Well, I'm going to apologize right away at the very beginning here at the episode. My throat feels a little sore. It's a little scratchy. Been dealing with a little bit of a cold. I got that wintertime cold coming through now. Dealing with the remainders of that. So that's all right. I have my routine. I've got the things that I need to get myself healthy. Everyone has a routine when they get sick, so we'll go through that in a second. But really quick, let's just jump into our main topic for today. Today is a mailbag question. The question is, can I land all of my data using the bronze layer and serve data out from there directly to my customers? So is it reasonable to only have the bronze layer of data when you load in data to Fabric or into a lakehouse? I think this is going to be an interesting topic. Looking forward to kind of unpacking what this means, and we'll get into that in a second. But anyways, a couple other announcements. Tommy, are you going to the Fabric Conference 2025?
That is currently the plan. So love being a part of the community lounge. So nothing's final yet, but I've heard so many good things about it from people who've gone. You went last year.
Yep.
So my plan is to go. It sounds awesome.
I think roughly it was around 4,000 people at the conference last year in Las Vegas. Easy to get to. We were staying in the MGM Grand Hotel, I think is where we were staying. I stayed in the hotel in the conference center, which was huge. It was like a multi-level conference. I'd highly recommend it. It was a good time. I had a lot of fun. Met a lot of new people, a lot of existing friends that I met up with and hung out there as well with them. Overall, would highly recommend it. There was tons of sessions, lots of things. Even I wanted to go to and make sure I jump in and learn a couple things. So definitely an enjoyable experience. Really liked it and would recommend. Also, in the description below, we have a discount for you. So if you're an avid listener of the podcast, don't say we ever gave you nothing. We are a Microsoft partner, so PowerBI.tips is the partner name. But if you check out, you can use partner 200 to get a $200 discount on your tickets to Fabric Conference. And then you just use the PowerBI.tips as the name of the partner where you got the tickets from. So welcome to have that. That's down in the description if you want to check that out. It's on all of our videos across all of YouTube and social media platforms in case you forget to where to go get it. But give that to your colleagues, your friends, and give them a little bit of a discount on the conference. All right, Tommy. What do you do when you get sick? What's your get better routine? Everyone's got a little bit of a routine when they get sick.
So obviously, first it depends on the sickness. Like, if is it the cold, is it the sore throat, or is it just the I'm down, I'm down kind of thing? So the down one, I actually actively try to sweat it off. So I will go in the downstairs bed.
Yep.
I will put on
your own separate space.
upon. Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. I need I'm not going upstairs where it's not
family
even
is
to infect everyone else, but just I like being in the dungeon, like I am alone in a cocoon, and I just put on sweaters.
You just work it out.
I just try to work it out, kind of thing. I will say, I don't know if it was when we had the whole thing that happened 5 years ago. I don't remember the name of it, but since then, my sweat's very different. And unfortunately, so it just smells. It's a weird, it's just upsetting. But when I feel the sweat coming, I'm like, yeah, baby. So
you're going to get better. That's weird. I've never heard of anyone doing that. My mom had always given me ramen noodle soup. So ramen is like my go-to. If I'm feeling sick or I'm coming out of sickness, it's like, okay, I need to eat some ramen to get better. And then also ginger ale has been my favorite. So I usually would eat a lot of ginger ale around, like I get sick, I crave ginger ale. I'll have a lot of ice in a glass.
That's awesome.
And then a filled up glass of ginger ale, and that seems to do pretty well for me.
So colds and sore throats, and I want to see if this goes across states here from an Italian point of view. But for me, when I was growing up, we had I call them immigrant remedies. Well, even my third generation.
Yep.
So if you had a cold, we get a pot of boiling water, and my mom would put Vaseline in it and just put a towel over your head. And you're like, I can't breathe. It's like, stay.
And no way.
Oh yeah. Oh, to me that was normal. And you go to junior high and you say, you do that too?
No one does that.
No one does that. So we had some weird things like that, but that was the worst. And I don't know if it helped.
No, I don't think I could
smell anything anymore, but
I'm not so I've never had anything like that. We never did like home remedies like that. More it was like just run to the doctor. I have a lot of like allergy type stuff. So I remember growing up, a lot of my sicknesses stuff was related around allergy related things, nose congestion, that kind of stuff. So
You give me a beach towel and hot water, and we're golden.
good to go. Oh man. Well, we're hoping everyone stays healthy and get through if you're going through the seasonal under the weather type feelings. We hope you all get better and we'll feel better soon. So for those of you who aren't sick, stay healthy. Don't keep getting your vitamin C and go outside and see the sun when you can, and hopefully that'll keep you healthier longer.
Yeah. And if it's not Vaseline, what's the one that you put on your chest or your arm?
That's Vicks Vapor Rub.
That's what we did, Vicks in the water. So if you're listening, not endorsed by the podcast to do Vicks in hot water. We just want to put that out there. That is not one of our consulting recommendations.
We are what do they say? This is not financial advice, right? This is not medical advice.
Yeah, this is not medical advice.
This is just things our moms did to us when we didn't know what was going on when we were younger.
Not one of our best practices.
That's amazing. Awesome. All right, well, jumping into news items. Any kind of news topics, things that are out there, Tommy, that you want to discuss or talk about?
Honestly, we did our big draft, and I think that's something we'll continue to do. Is as Fabric and Power BI updates come back, we're going to do that kind of draft format. But besides that, we're getting back into it. I think with all the new stuff.
I do want to throw out a big comment here from Rui Romano yesterday. He on January 16th, he dropped out a really, really interesting blog. A deep dive into TMDL view for Power BI Desktop. Rui also came on the channel last week, I think it was Wednesday. And he and I went in a deep dive all the way through the TMDL view, all the information, the details there. It was quite elaborate. I'll definitely highly recommend the YouTube video about this topic. This will change how you build things in desktop, 100%. Every single user of this. Now, if you're a brand new user, you're probably not going to want to dig in a lot. But it's still useful. In small doses, I think the TMDL view could make it really easy for editing multiple measures, checking that things are built correctly. So I do think it's going to be very useful for people. Yeah. Highly recommend it. Go check out his blog. The blog post here is actually very informative. And one of the things that Rui does, which is, I think, very encouraging here, is he's trying to give you like practical examples of where you can use TMDL view. So I really recommend it. TMDL view is coming to desktop. It's already out now. When you download your latest version of desktop, it will be there. It will change how you do your work daily to day. So really recommend that.
That's a good news item because I'm seeing a lot of people have a lot of buzz about it. Marco Russo's been talking about it too. So to talk about adoption, you want people like you want people like Marco Russo and Rui and other people that are very prominent to talk about it because that introduces the concept, right? Rather than just, and I think DAX Query, maybe it's gotten love, but I don't think it's going to get as much love as TMDL view.
I think you're right on that. DAX Query view, I think, is extremely useful. But TMDL view does things that you traditionally couldn't do in the semantic model. Like you couldn't make or edit a perspective. You couldn't change various properties inside the semantic model. You couldn't add annotations. Like it's all these extra things that the semantic model provides you that you just couldn't easily modify. Well, now this is great because anytime they want to bring a brand new feature to the semantic model, it'll be immediately exposed as part of TMDL view. So any new feature they bring in will 100% be supported by Power BI Desktop. And I think, honestly, Microsoft got some feedback. I mean, think about it, right? You've got this semantic model. You're editing and you're building it in desktop. And imagine having a tool that the creator of the semantic model gives you that you can't do everything in. You need third-party tools to do all the extra manipulation pieces. And so Microsoft, I think, got some really strong feedback that they need to be able to edit the entire semantic model in one program. It has to be Power BI Desktop. So this is why I've been saying for a number of years now, and Tommy, I think you maybe will more agree with me recently here, is the desktop is becoming more of that pro developer tool now that we have two more windows that are purely code-based windows inside desktop. It's going to be the pro dev tool. And I think you're going to want to use more for that easy to use experience. It's going to be web-based more stuff, more and more as desktop gets more and more pro developer type tooling.
I'm going to push back a little. It's not a full pushback. It's a one-handed, like on the shoulder, like, hey, this is not a full like football pushback. And these are the two reasons why. One, they're buttons that are optional. It's not really prominent, especially if you don't enable them, right? So I can still go about my business every day.
Currently, they're
If
in preview, so they're not all automatically out.
right.
Yes.
And obviously they will be, but if I was a hermit or a monk in Germany and I just didn't have the internet, but I did Power BI, just run with it.
Don't know how this it relates at all,
Yeah,
but okay, Tommy,
no,
keep
no.
going. I see. You're one who doesn't read up on the blog, doesn't need all the latest, greatest thing. You know,
Right.
my company pushed Power BI Desktop to my laptop, kind of thing, right? Look, I don't really know what's going on. It's just here. I'm going to start using it. Like, you're not digging in and actively researching it.
I would challenge, even if you're a weekly developer or weekly author in Power BI Desktop, you don't have a incentive to use TMDL.
Probably not. Yeah,
Probably not. So
probably not.
But
the more you model semantic models, the more you do data modeling, I think the more you're going to want to use it. And again, Rui clearly states in the blog, this is a pro developer tool for semantic models and desktop. So highly recommend it. Super good video. I'll put the link here for the video here down below, so everyone else can check it out and watch the video. It's getting good views already, so I think people will really like to engage with this part of the product.
1,000%.
Any other news or announcements, Tommy? Is there anything on the Fabric blog at this point? I don't know when Fabric rolls out its blog posts.
I'm not going to say not worth talking about. It's a lot of, I'll call it admin things. There's a log management. Maybe we can get into that another day. Some service principal support for Fabric Data Warehouse. Speed up your SQL database with a performance dashboard. So I think a lot of performance enhancement types of items, not so much UI or features at this point. Surge protection is another one, which I'm like, for my outlet, like how much power are we getting here? So, but that's really, I would say, the biggest items, and then like SQL database and workspace roles with item permission. So I think we're going to see a lot with SQL database features and just enhancements coming up.
Yeah, I mean, SQL database is out in preview right now, and it's just, I think they just kind of get it out the door. Like, hey, here it is, you can use it. The next layer of features are going to be more about security, authorization, getting the administration portion of it corrected, and more in line with, like, I mean, Fabric has its own way of doing things. SQL Server had its own way of managing users and content and things as well. So Microsoft's got to figure out the story of how do you bring a SQL Server into Fabric and still give it the same level of control that you had previously in SQL, but all the additional richness that comes with Fabric. What is that going to look like? So I think they've got to figure out that story a bit more, and they're kind of like listening to the, here it is, SQL's here, community, what do you want? So I think it's very important that the community, if you want various aspects of the SQL Server in Fabric, please be vocal. Go out and make stuff on the ideas.powerbi.com site. It's extremely important that you make comments about what you want, because the product team is actively listening for those things and will change stuff according to the community.
We're about at the 90-day mark of databases being announced. So let me ask you, how fast are you running with SQL databases? Are we a light jog? Are we turkey trot kind of run? Are we doing sprinting at this point? Where are you right now with SQL databases in terms of your actual use of it in your day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of things with the Lakehouse. I mean, a lot of my reporting is not operational reporting. Most of my reporting is slower than that, like once or twice a day reporting pieces. And most of our customers don't need a full SQL Server to do these things. I am getting a lot more questions around companies that are saying, hey, we're doing things like budgeting, or we need things that are going to be a bit more fluid and need real-time updates to things as a team of people work on planning things for the future. That's where I think the SQL Server makes a lot of sense right now. It's going to give you that highly available system that's going to allow users to quickly enter or add records into tables and then immediately visibly show those inside Power BI reports with direct query. But I think that's going to be a very big win. We're seeing people explore it right now. I don't have any customers actively building on top of the SQL database right now for production or a project yet, but I think this will be, in the near term, individuals are going to want to start looking at it. I have been doing some additional testing on it. So I have a workspace that I do a lot of testing with.
Yeah.
I just turned on the SQL Server. One of the observations that I was very pleased to see, and this is going to be very technical in nature, but ask questions if it doesn't make sense. With some features in Fabric, you turn them on. Every day, they cost you compute units. One of those is real-time analytics. So if you turn on an event hub or event stream, You turn on an event stream, it's on all the time, and every day you're seeing a little bit of compute units just being dripped away because the machine's turned on, right? It has to be highly available. If
It
you're
has to be
sending it,
listening.
has to be listening to the data that's coming in. So there's always some bit of compute that's kind of being consumed. And I thought, I wonder how SQL Server will work. Is it the same experience? Like if I turn on the SQL Server, it's always on and it's going to continue to listen or be available in my, like, will I see it constantly being used in my compute usage? So I have gone to my workspace. I turned it on. I played with some SQL. I made some tables, looked around with it a little bit. I saw the CU compute come through the analytics reporting, and I left it alone. I didn't touch it for a couple of days. And I was pleasantly surprised that there wasn't this slow drain of compute usage when the SQL Server wasn't actively being accessed or data wasn't being read from it. That's big. That's really big because I was really worried. Like if I turn on a SQL Server, is it going to consume like 1,000 CU a day just because it's on? Just because I click the button, like the same thing that the event stream does? No, it does not. It doesn't seem like it's doing that. So as long as you're using it, it seems like it turns itself on. Now, what I don't know is, I imagine it's something more like your Spark engine, right? So when you turn on a Spark engine or a Spark compute, you can turn it on. It turns on and it stays on for a period of time, and then it shuts off. So it stops charging you. The machines they spool themselves down and pause, basically, right?
Yeah.
So I was kind of thinking, is SQL Server the same way? So things I haven't done yet is I need to start doing like a daily job on the SQL Server just to like wake it up, see what it's doing, and then like let it run for a couple of days. I'd be curious to see what that does impact wise for the compute usage to see if it ramps up really high or really low. And is there a period of time that the SQL engine is running, right? Is it making compute units for just the duration of running my queries and then it immediately shuts off, or does it need like a 8 hours, a 12 hours, or 24 hours of time before it actually says, oh, I'm not being used. I can actually pause myself, shut down the machines, and then I stop getting charged compute units. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
No, this is actually, I'm pretty sure that sounds like I'm encouraged, but also slightly concerned by what you said, because that sounds to me exactly like the basic Azure SQL database. If you were to get, I think it's like a B1 in Azure. So, and it's your point, you don't pay for
the serverless version of that, right? The serverless version. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. And in Azure, they have like two kind of directions you can go with a database. The basic one has basically what you said. It sounds like you're not paying for it just to sit there. You pay for when it's actually getting called or transacted. But the problem is, and I don't know this, is the features available with that, because the other version of the SQL database in Azure has a lot more features and a lot more scalability. So I think the equivalent, I'm pretty sure I read this somewhere in some of the documentation, the equivalent Fabric database is like the basic or standard version of a Azure database. So you're limited with features, but it does what the basics of what you need it to do. So that's fine. But then it goes to our other questions that we've always had. Does that meet the needs of any type of database I need? Yeah, like a standard database, sure. But for more complex scenarios, how does that actually scale? So it's nice to know that if I store my data, it's not going to pay for that. It's really just paying for when I'm calling it. If I do a refresh, a little cost, fine. That's what you're used to.
Yes.
I'm not paying for everything else. I've done some tests as well, not from the cost side, but from the feature side.
Okay.
So
what do you think about the features? What are you seeing from your side of things?
So to use that running analogy, I'm not doing track. It's not track and field yet, but I'm doing light jogs in the morning for some exercise.
Yeah.
That's about where it is, because it's
really cold right now, so it's good to at least put on your shoes and
some New Year's
do a mile on the treadmill.
It's a New Year's resolution trying to
run. Exactly. Yeah. We'll see how long you last until February. There may not be many more runs when we hit February.
It's still not as seamless as I would like when dealing with other systems, because to me, if you're going to have a database, it's not like I'm not doing a database just so I can do reporting in Power BI. That's silly to me.
I would agree with you. I think it is silly. And again, I think I want to just unpack your comment there, because I think it's a really important point. If you're reporting speed, the speed in which you need to have new data come into your reporting solution is, more than 3 or 4 times a day.
Yeah.
It's not probably worth it for you to go after Spark and lake houses If you need it more than that, you might want to start thinking about databases to actually be that transactional system where you're getting more real-time access to that data. I'm not sure if I'm going to be putting like billions of rows inside the SQL server, but
yeah.
if you're doing like a definition table, like I've seen people do things like, hey, we want to have a lookup table for something, and we want to have like configuration parameters stored somewhere. Well, people are comfortable using a SQL database to do that. I think it's great. I think, anyways, I think I just want to. There's a scale and a position for this where the data needs to be more real time or more up to date immediately. I think that's a good use case for the SQL server. Sorry, Tommy, you're going to keep saying things you're testing.
A good point. We already got you just got another topic on the board. Fabric or Gen 1 data flows or SQL databases, if I'm doing reference to.
Ooh,
that's a good one.
Good question on that one.
But to your point, like if I'm creating a database in Fabric, the purpose of that, it would not be just reporting. It better talk to Power Automate and do well.
Sure.
It better talk to Power Apps or other application-based systems.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Can input, output data, right? It's not just reporting. That's what that's the point.
So you could stand up the SQL server, the SQL endpoint exists, but you're saying it's a little bit too much friction for you to use Power Automate or Power Apps
compared
with
to
it
a
at this
normal
point.
SQL database with any other system, right?
And you've done a lot of this in the past where you've done a lot of Power Apps on top of a SQL database.
Exactly. And I think that, to me, that's where I've always seen a database be. It's obviously reporting, but it dang well better talk to other systems and not just Microsoft systems because it's a database. That's the power of it.
And you're talking about, when you say talk, you're talking like a two-way talking path, right? Read
input,
and
output, integrate,
yes,
integrate and automate. So
the reason I'm making that distinction right now is because I don't think I agree 100% with you on that one. I think of I think of the Fabric platform as more of a consumption method, a landing zone for all the data. So I think of it more of like a read-only kind of thing. Like I'm going to go talk to things.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of how, again, until Fabric SQL, I mean, you can do some read-write things inside the Fabric world. But I mean, I think of it more of I have data that exists in to your point, many different sources. I'm trying to I have production servers that are running things. I need to get that data down to Fabric as quickly as possible so I can shape it and tune it and join it together, right? If I think about the flows of data, other data systems are doing the in and outs of data, editing, changing, the updates. But Fabric is the system more in charge of collecting everything into one place. But I think of it as kind of like the bottom of the funnel, maybe, is how I think of it. And I think SQL databases change part of that mentality. It's not the bottom of the funnel anymore. You have the ability of building an application inside Fabric. That'll be interesting. I'll be interested to see how what people will do with that.
I like that you and I differ there because I think that's the point that you differ on is the thing I'm most excited about Fabric, where Power BI and the data platform is no longer the last stop on the train in terms of where your data is going. To your point, at the end of the bottom of the funnel, it's been elevated where it's like, well, you can get off the train, you can take a left. There's a lot of more directions your data can go.
Yes, I agree with that.
Reporting. Well, and I think that's actually not a bad segue.
Not a bad segue at all. Want to go into our main topic today, Tommy? Give us our main topic for today.
First, again, thank you to everyone who's submitting mailbags. We're trying to go through all of them. We love the questions. And if you want to know how we pick it, it's one if me and Mike both go, ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
Well, let's be real here, Tommy. If your name ends with Mike or begins with Mike, your topic will get picked. This is another Mike.
Name ends with D. Carlo.
This is who are all the Mikes? All the Mikes must listen to the podcast, or maybe no one wants to give their name. They just keep saying this may become a running joke. Like no one actually submits any questions to the podcast. It's just me submitting them, or everyone's using my name to submit questions back to the podcast.
I am not going to say publicly I'm biased towards Italian names. No.
This question comes from Giovanni.
This is a Gaetano Luigi, Gianluigi.
Yes.
No, but honestly, we love the questions that come in. So let's jump right in.
All right, read us off this question.
From another Mike. With Fabric, do you think it's reasonable to have the bronze layer as the only source of data? Think different from the typical data warehousing replication of a source system, but storing around 100 gigs of unstructured data in the bronze layer rather than on a local network drive. Can this be considered a more accessible form of blob storage? Hot storage, cold storage, would this be the cost prohibitive or inappropriate to the only source of some of the data?
That's a great question. So
So
there's a
awesome
couple
question.
there's a couple questions kind of impacted in here, right? So I think the first main question is, should bronze be the only source of data? And I think I have definitely some clear thoughts around how I feel about that one. And then I think the next question is here is is there a size of scale of data, right? So there's kind of a scaling size thing here. Then they asked the question around hot or cold storage, which I definitely want to unpack that. There's some, I think, limitations with the fabric storage inside the lake house. You only get hot storage, you don't get cold storage there. But you would have patterns on how you would use hot and cold storage. And I believe the storage accounts now, if you bought an Azure storage account today, there's actually more than just hot and cold. I think you have warm storages now too. So you have hot, warm, and cold storage, and you have archive. There's like 4 layers of ways you can store data in case you need to store information. So
Yeah.
let's unpack those.
Oh man, yeah.
What do you think, Tom? Let's start with this first question, I guess.
I think the first one is the one that to me is the most intriguing. Is not even a good enough word here, but the idea of using Fabric to only store my bronze data and use that as kind of in a sense of just a repository of my data is pretty powerful when you think about what a lot of companies go through with trying to get a hold of their data. To me, and I'll rephrase that a different way. If you can get all my data in a Fabric, and even if it's in bronze, even if it's just a raw thing, but it's all in Fabric, that is a huge win for a ton of companies and a major win. Even if we still have to do a ton of stuff and we're not there yet, if I can push all my data from all these different sources, Excel, blobs, other SQL databases even, and it's all in a centralized place that I can locate, I guarantee you, at least the majority of companies I work with would sign up for that today if they knew that was available.
Yes.
And I think I would call this a huge win if you were able to do this.
So I'm not saying if. I think I'm assuming the bronze layer exists. So let me just define what I interpret the bronze layer as. So the reason I think this question is also coming up is they're talking about the medallion architecture: bronze, silver, and gold. Right? Those are the 3 different layers. Bronze is defined as raw data. Like I make an API call, the data that comes back is a straight JSON object. It's just JSON. It's a file that is .json. That's a file. If you use a pipeline or you use a data flows Gen 2, you can go to a SQL server, hit a table, return the data as a table. That table then is placed back in the lakehouse as a Delta table. So it makes a series of files, tables written back into the lakehouse as a table form, something that everything else in Fabric can read, but that table is already formed into like an easy to read table, right? Those are the 2 main. There's unstructured or semi-structured data, and then there's just straight tables of information you're going to go get. The bronze layer is intended to be that raw layer. One mistake I think I find a lot of companies overthinking a little bit here is when you build I'm going to go back to the SQL Server analogy. When you build a SQL Server and you're loading data in, you typically have 2 tables. You have a staging table where you bring in the information as is, stage it. And then from the staging table, you do some joins back to your main table on, okay, I've staged the data. Do I insert records or do I add new records to my main table or do I delete records, right? Maybe there's delete your handling there too, right? So the staging table is where you land the data before you actually make the final modification to the final table. I like in the bronze analogy, that's kind of more silver in the landscape of medallion architectures. But what I would say is, the bronze layer, sometimes people make a mistake of over cleaning the data, over transforming it before it gets to bronze. So what they'll do is they'll make a data flow instead of just connecting to the data source and load it in with no changes, just load it in. What they'll do is they'll I'm going to rename this column. I'm going to delete these things. Again, but the tool makes it easy, right? There's this thought around I want to be able to modify that information. Also thinking through a SQL connection, right? In that SQL connection, you can write a SQL statement to do whatever you want. You can make a view on the SQL server. You can do transformations there to make the SQL server, join multiple tables together, build a more complex view, and then just load the final view into your bronze layer.
Sure. Yeah.
These all have trade-offs, right? So the idea here for me, bronze, is I want the data as close to the raw data source as possible. That way I can check, like literally run a query against source system, run a query against bronze, and know the number of records are the same. The total of sales is the same, right? So me personally, I want to have the bronze layer be as untouched as possible and as close to the source system as it physically can be. Then, to answer the question directly now, is it reasonable to have only bronze? I don't think so. If you're doing transformations before you get to bronze, as you're doing the loading process, then yeah, maybe you could. I don't really love doing that though. I don't think
that's the question, is it?
Well, do you think it's reasonable to have the bronze data as the only source of data?
It's the layer. I don't do anything else. Or not focused on doing anything.
Yeah, to me, that's again, you may be interpreting the question a little bit differently, Tommy, but I'm interpreting this as there's no silver or gold layers. I don't need any additional transformations to get it into something else.
Oh, I see.
That's how I'm interpreting it. I think you're interpreting. I think you're thinking it totally separate. I'm thinking about it as like I don't need any other transformations, and I would disagree with that. I would say you need some layer of transformations. Now, it may not be bronze, silver, gold, but it will probably be bronze final form of data, right? So it may be bronze gold. You may not have a silver layer. You may be able to do all your transformations right from the bronze raw data. And then that's why I brought up the analogy earlier of the staging versus final table, right? Think of your bronze layer as the staging layer where I bring the data in, I stage it, and then I go to a final version of that table and then do it in gold. The reason I bring this up is because let's imagine I have a semantic model that's refreshing or multiple semantic models that are refreshing. If I put that data transformation logic into the semantic model, every time I refresh those semantic models, I'm reapplying the same business logic over and over and over again. It's costing me compute. So what I would prefer to do is compute the data once, save it, and then only read the saved data because that's always going to be faster.
Yeah.
Save the final table as opposed to, reading the table, doing a bunch of computes, and then doing something else with it.
This is why I love the podcast, because I need these other different ways of interpretation. I would have taken it the way you're saying it.
Okay.
If he said that we just went straight to gold, if that was the wording there, in my view.
Yeah. Right? I'm assuming that the comment is like bronze only. Like I'm only going to land the data. That's it. I think what you were saying, Tommy, was should all my reporting come from something that's like in the lake house?
Yeah, like basically, I don't care if I'm even doing anything with it. Should I just store the bronze layer and we'll just go from there? And it's intriguing you say that. And I want to touch on the way that you took it, which it is kind of, you could take it both ways. To your point, I would agree with you in if that was the way that the question was asked, like the point of Fabric too is to be able to go through those steps.
Yes.
Right. Like, if I'm doing everything everywhere else, then we're kind of missing the point here. So I would completely agree with that.
And let me give you just kind of one other point to my reasoning of why I think this, right? So the second part of the question, Mike asks, let's say I'm storing around 100 gigabytes of data from whatever systems if you know how much data you're getting into Fabric, it sounds like you're coming from something structured, right? It's not unstructured data, right? So it's probably a SQL database. Yeah. It's probably some structured tables of data because roughly the size of how much data is coming to Fabric. Even if, humor me here for a minute. If I brought 100 gigabytes to Fabric and stored that for a whole year, every gig you store for an entire year is 21 cents. So that means 100 gigs would cost you $21 to store all the data. So the reason I bring this up is there is not any amount of compute you can buy for an entire year that can do raw transformations or like stuff on data. The compute will always be more expensive than just pure storing the information. Yeah. So because storage is so incredibly cheap, even if I had to double that, let's say I take 100 gigabytes and make it inside bronze, and I make another 100 gigabytes in silver, you're talking $40 a year. I guarantee you that data is adding more than $40 of value to you. I would probably even add I would probably even say that data is probably making 10 times the amount of value. So take $21. Let's just say you did a terabyte for a year. We'll just multiply that by another zero. Okay, $210 for a year. That's like nothing. You spend that much money on Fabric, like on the low F scale. Yeah. So the fact that it's so cheap to store things, Like, I want you to feel super, like, have little resistance to just bring everything to Fabric. Just get it in there. And then once you have it there, then we think about the most efficient way to compute it and bring it out into reporting. Because there has never been any project I've ever been on where the source system has data in the exact right format that I need for reporting. There's always some level of transformation happening.
And even if it's clean, doesn't mean it's ready for the reporting and for the business. Because so there are some context clues here that really took me in the direction, or take me in the direction of that. The idea or the concept here, Mike, of we are just focusing our number one priority, regardless of if we're going to do anything with it, is we're going to take the data and store it in Fabric and then allow people to connect to it. But that's number one goal. I don't care about silver. I don't care about gold. I just want unstructured data in my system. The one is obviously, he used the word unstructured, but he's talking about Azure blobs. Yeah, he's talking about a network drive. To me, these are Excel files, and this is all just your, give me your tired, your poor, so to speak, of give me your data. I don't care in what format it is, rather than trying to do anything with it. And I kind of like this, and I kind of like this a lot, Mike. And this is why. And this idea of that would be a project for Fabric. If you recall, on a early podcast we did, we talked about mental assumptions and like mental misconceptions. One of those was about the jar, the options of choice, or the crisis of too many choices. I think a lot of people are going to fall in a trap, and a lot of organizations are going to fall in the trap with Fabric, where I have to do everything. If I get data in, I have to do bronze, silver, gold. I have to do all the transformations. I have to do a database, or I have to do the direct lake for all my projects. Otherwise, it's not worth it. And I think that is a huge misconception and missing the point of Fabric. It can do all of that. Yes. Just like you can go to a sushi buffet and eat everything.
Well, you could go to you can go to a sushi buffet and you can order like steak. You can do it, but is it probably the best option? Probably not. You're probably going to get better sushi at the sushi bar than just a steak.
Right. And I'm not going to argue, or I'm not going to deny that I may have ordered way too many sushi. Yeah, 2 orders of wontons. Yeah. How many? 5 Philadelphia rolls, please. Yes, I love sushi. Anyways,
or Tommy goes there and says, "Where's your pasta menu?" Like, there's no linguine on this.
No, I've said you're like all you can eat. We'll see about that. So
I'm gonna put you to the test.
Yeah.
That's my son when it comes down to eating pizza and things. He's like he will. We call him he has a hollow leg because he can fit so much pizza in his mouth. We literally think about now is whenever we order pizza, we're like, okay, we need a cheese pizza for the family. We need the pepperoni pizza for the family, and we need one pizza for him. He gets his own pizza that he can just eat.
I like my nickname that I've given myself as a garbage disposal.
Yeah.
If it's left, it's going away. But
as a dad, though, as an Italian dad, like we do that. Like we clean it down. Like I can't stomach the ability to like throw food away. We're just not doing that.
No. You use everything and everything kind of thing. Does the broccoli have we'll find a recipe.
Yes, exactly.
And not to go more Italian on here, but I made the best penne alla vodka I've ever made on Sunday. I will send you the recipe, and I use ChatGPT a little.
Okay, that's all right. That's fair.
Yeah. And anyways, we can talk about that later.
Okay, hold on. Since we're talking pasta, I got to give you our family has been starting to make pasta on our own. Fresh pasta.
What flour are you using?
I don't know yet. Okay. I made a big mistake. I'm not a really good Italian. I bought the wrong flour. Tommy, I pulled. So this is Michael, personal experience. This is a revealing moment here, so I have to apologize for everyone who's actually really Italian and listen to the show.
We're open together.
We're coping with this, right? So I went to the grocery store and I said, I'm gonna go to the Italian section. Like we have like cheeses and meats and things like from Italy. Like, great. I'm gonna find the right flour that's gonna be the best for pasta. And I walked around and I found a bag. And it had nothing but Italian on it. I'm like, this has got to be it. This is
I think I know where you're going with.
Tommy knows where it is. So I brought it home, and I can tell you, I worked for an hour trying to make the dough, and it would never stick together. I was trying to make pasta out of like the pizza dough, like the dough that you would make pizzas out of. Like,
oh no! I knew that's where it was going. I'm like,
it's all wrong. It's all wrong.
Great for 900 degrees, terrible for pasta.
Nope, not good. So, anyways. That aside, I have learned my lesson. We're now getting different flour. Is it the 00 flour that I should be using? Yes.
Caputo 00 flour. You can buy it on Amazon. I'm sending it to you right now. This is really, really, yeah. And it says pizzeria on it, but
You
that's
know what?
not
We're going to change the podcast to, data is like pasta.
I'm totally down for this. So this is the one you got to use. This is the one from not. We'll continue that. We'll do another podcast
for another episode. Back to what you were saying, Tommy.
Let's take it back. We're back to sushi options.
Mm-hmm.
Options. This is something I'm feeling more and more strongly about with Fabric, where you could do all of it because you can. It's all available, all the buttons, and if I want to do every lake house, but that doesn't mean you have to, nor does it mean it's the best choice. To go back to the question here, for some of you going, I'm still on sushi. The idea here is if I'm just going to put the bronze layer, no, I have to do silver gold. That's not the case because you may not have the technical skill. You may not have the governance or the kind of the long-term thinking here. The win, and a huge win for a lot of organizations, if I were to tell them, we're just going to store your data in Fabric, and then on ad hoc basis, we'll do transformations and figure it out as we go, is a complete and wonderful idea because, again, I don't have to make every decision with a lake house. I don't have to go through all the transformations at once.
Mm-hmm.
It's too easy to think that way, and I think a lot of organizations are going to fall in this trap where they're going to have too many projects at once because they're storing the data. Now we have to do this medallion approach that Microsoft's pushing. But that's not always the best case. Maybe it's just the unstructured data in a SQL database, and we deal like we've dealt with Power BI. Mike, have you ever dealt with a Power BI semantic model that was not gold data? I have all the time because you didn't have the luxury of everything, and you make it work with a data flow Gen 1 or a lot of steps in Power Query. But that doesn't mean that that's gone away. I can still do that. But guess what? In this scenario, all my data is in Fabric. I can locate it. It's not like, wait, what SQL database or what Excel file is that coming from? And if it becomes a priority, changes can be made on a ad hoc priority basis.
Yeah, and Tommy, I'm gonna not challenge you here, but I'm gonna maybe add some more context to this one too as well. You're basically speaking to this in a way that is saying we're assuming everyone's just on board with Fabric and going ahead. There's probably a large majority of developers in Power BI that are still only able to use Power BI for whatever reason. The organization has decided not to allow anyone to use Fabric. We're not going to pay for it.
We know how adoption goes.
It's a different paying mechanism than we were doing with just a pure pro user, right? So in lieu of that, right, I'm thinking to myself, there's a whole bunch of users here who say, man, I would really like to get my hands on Fabric. I really like to get the Fabric SQL databases, but they don't even have the ability of getting to that level because their organization just says, we're not ready to do that yet. And so they're only living in data marts, data flows Gen 1, and pure Power BI. Everything we're discussing here assumes we're in the Fabric space. And to be honest, the lion's share of users in Fabric have to be still just using Power BI yet. They're not yet ready to do Fabric. So we're talking about some things here that are kind of interesting. So I just want to call that out as like a point that
I love that. Yeah.
Because we have to be, as we're talking about bronze data, I mean, we can do bronze data with data flows Gen 1. So you make a single data flow, land the data. But in my experience, you're always going to need to transform it or shape it or join some tables together. It's never quite right and ready to go for your semantic model straight out of data flows Gen 1, unless you're doing a lot of transformations. And honestly, if you read the documentation on Gen 1 documentation, they recommend you make a single data flow to just land the data. Mm-hmm. Once the data is landed, then you pick it up again and then do transformations to it to shape it for your final data sets. It's the same thing we're talking about here with bronze and silver. And so to keep weaving my points together here, going back to, is it reasonable to only have bronze layers, right? I'm seeing kind of a couple patterns emerge inside lakehouse development. You can take a lakehouse, you can name the lakehouse itself. You can name the lakehouse the bronze lakehouse. And so all your tables that go into lakehouse are bronze related. However, lakehouses now are able to come with schemas. So now you can have the data lakehouse or data, whatever you want to call it, data guide, data hub, whatever you want to call it, right? the lakehouse can now have multiple schemas inside it. So now you can actually have a schema that is only bronze tables, and then you can have all the tables named the way you want for the bronze, how you land the data in. And then you can also have a different schema for silver or transformed or final or whatever you want to call it. You can have other schemas that pull from the bronze tables and use them in downstream tables as well. So to this person's question, right? Can I only use a bronze layer for data? Yes, you can. But is it advisable from an organization standpoint? I think no, right? I would at minimum have, even if it's a single lakehouse, I would minimum have a bronze layer of schema, and I'd have a, call it final, call it gold, call it whatever you want, a transformed layer. I'd have a second layer in there that's a little bit more refined and ready to go for my semantic model to consume it.
So, Mike, I think you found a treasure map for me here, something you mentioned here. I really like what you said, but one thing I think we've struggled with so far into the Fabric game, both from a documentation and a practical point of view, is what does pilot programs and adoption look like? Now, Microsoft does have the adoption roadmap, but
Yes.
it's still more centered on Power BI. The Fabric things are more theoretical. They're not necessarily logistical in terms of how do I actually roll it out.
Well, I don't want to say the word theoretical. I disagree with your comment on that one. I think the Fabric side of things are more unformed yet.
Unformed, fine,
right? Because I think, I mean, if I had to say, what's the ideal solution? The ideal solution is one lakehouse per workspace, and you're landing in that lakehouse multiple schemas, and then I'm securing down to the table level of detail with security, right? Those features don't technically exist today. They're kind of working on them. It's kind of a work in progress, but even schemas in a lakehouse I think they're still in preview. So there's features that I'm using today as part of like my workloads that are not quite finished yet, and it's getting better. So your point, Tommy, like I would say, like there's emerging patterns in Fabric right now.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. So it's not theoretical. It's being worked on. It's just not solidified yet.
To the scale that Microsoft's provided when it goes managed self-service, small enterprise, like basically how do we roll it out? Now, your comment here, I think to me, it gives me much excitement, and actually in terms of a very practical way where storing the data is a milestone. You want a pilot program for Fabric, and what does that look like?
Yep.
I mean, dude, like just the idea of our first thing we're going to work on, our milestone here is we're going to just get our data into Fabric. Then you can do your data flows Gen 1 if that's what you're comfortable with here. We're eventually going to migrate, but we know, to your point, organizations are slow to adopt technology, and as we are so many steps ahead of in terms of where the blog is and the feature updates. I would say I would feel pretty safe in assuming any feature announcement you see today is not going to be widely adopted for another 6-9 months minimum. And that's just the way it is, regardless of preview or GA. It's just how organizations get around to it. So let's assume that we're, Back to the Future. Let's assume that we're 6 months ago with features with Fabric for money organizations. All that to say, a strong selling point for Fabric. I feel like if you didn't know where to get started and you didn't have the skills, you don't have the data engineers on your team, you're all Power BI, to get your data just into Fabric. And then we could do our data flows Gen 1 off of that. And then we can do our, transformations off of that. I mean, what a solid place to start.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you, Tom. I think this is a really solid question. A lot of what I'm going to be, and again, I've said this multiple times with my clients. I say this a lot of times with when I work with customers. You want to optimize for the compute. You don't need to optimize for storage. In the past, when you use SQL on-prem, we had to optimize for storage. The reason this is because you bought a piece of hardware that had a certain limit of size of space on the machine. Like you bought a SQL server and you bought 20 terabytes of space on it. That was it. All your data must fit in 20 terabytes. Every day you're loading things in if you're going to snapshot data. So there was a lot more concern in the SQL world before getting to lakehouses that you were so worried about how much data is being stored. That was such a constraint. This is where dimensional modeling came from. This is where a lot of the hyper efficient storage methods of like, I'm going to do a lot of snapshots. I'm not going to do a whole thing. So the the reason we're moving to cloud is the storage becomes way less cost compared to the compute side. Now, think about your on-prem SQL server, right? You've already bought the machine. You capitalized it. You purchased the compute day one. You own it. So, however many virtual cores you own, 100 of them, whatever, you want to use as much of that 100 virtual cores as every day as possible to push data around, to do database things, to do all the things you need to do. You've already paid for those cores. You want those cores to run nonstop to get the best money out of your value out of your money, right? So the fact that you prepay for compute and now you want to use all of it, I understand that. But Fabric is different in the way that you can scale up the compute for what you need. Now, to some degree, Fabric is similar, right? You buy a certain F SKU, and that is the amount of compute you get for the day or for the month or whatever that is. And you buy more F SKUs, you get more compute, right? So that's the same kind of principle. You're buying dedicated compute capacities. But the storage side of things basically goes away. So I have other thoughts on this too around just the optimization, but I do want to answer one last question here. I don't want to kind of kill my comment here, and I want to totally shift gears. There was one other question here that was talking about, can we use this in a blob storage account way of a hot and cold storage? So hot storage is more expensive, but it's cheaper to access read and writes. Cold storage is more expensive to access on read, but it's very cheap to write the data in. The idea being is I just need to store the data, but I want to store it very cheaply, and I'm not going to access the information very frequently. So what I know right now, Fabric has no concept of cold storage. It's everything's in hot, no matter what. However, what I do recommend for companies here, if you are really interested in using cold storage inside your Fabric environment, and the fact that you're even asking this tells me you already know a little bit about Azure already, you would go spin up your own Azure Blob Storage, and then once a quarter, once a month, decide what data you're not going to use anymore, and run a pipeline and physically copy the data out of your hot storage in Fabric, load it into your cold storage inside Lakehouse, inside your Blob Storage, and then go back to your Fabric environment and delete the data out. What that does is it basically, if you have a bunch of snapshots, if you have a bunch of old data, you're taking down a server and you just want a copy of it, right? Copy it over to Fabric, use it for a period of time. And if you no longer need it anymore, you can always copy that data down to cold storage in blob storage. That's technically still accessible inside Fabric, but you can then get different pricing options on what storage accounts, what containers are using hot, warm, or cold storage to then further reduce your cost to store data. But again, every time I've done one of these projects, almost no one is concerned about the storage costs. Everyone is concerned about the compute cost. That is where the real money comes from. I mean, you're talking like, I don't know, 5, 7, 8. I don't know what the comparison is, but it's roughly like a 5x, 6x cost in compute versus storage. So I'm always going to optimize for how can I bring my data in, compute it one time, save the results, and then just read the results. Easy.
Yeah. No, I honestly, I have no argument or disagreement there. I agree 100% with what you're saying. You really don't want to take this as the same way as an Azure. It's not a it's not a replication of an Azure blob, except for the hot concept here.
Yes.
So I would not want to treat it that way.
No, we're not going to use, I'm not going to go into Fabric thinking, oh, I'm going to move this data out of bronze into this cold storage layer inside Fabric. Today, that does not exist. That I'm aware of. If someone really had a hard requirement of like, hey, I have to move data into cold storage, for me, I would really push for the Data Lake Gen 2 storage account in Azure, and then I would physically copy the data over, and then I would delete it out of my Fabric environment if I wanted to start saving money that way.
I think that, and again, we have all the options available. The data flows Gen 2 are awesome, man, except for SQL databases. We're working on that still. So
it's going to get better. It's going to get smoother.
It's not going to bug out on me. But no, I love that. I really have nothing else there. I think we're probably at closing thoughts now. And
I think you're right.
Honestly, for me, my closing thought is pretty straightforward. Is if you're working and you're beginning that stage, getting to Fabric, already have it. The idea from a milestone point of view to get your data into Fabric, and then we'll deal with what we need to deal with. Can be a huge win, especially if you don't have the technical expertise yet and you don't have the maturity yet. The win itself to say that my data is in Fabric, raw or on raw, bronze, and it needs all the work in the world, fine. But guess what? I have the governance around it. I have the location around it. I know where it is. And we can now prioritize from there rather than trying to boil the ocean. Make your choices wisely, but a huge, wonderful first step, even from a pilot program, is get your data into Fabric. I'm love this mailback question.
Yeah, I agree with that one. I'll also add one final thought here too is in doing this experience with Fabric and building lake houses and tables and things, one thing I find a lot with people is they use a lot of prefixes with their tables. So if you're building bronze tables, if you're building raw data, if you're building transformed data, if you don't use schemas, if you don't have different lake houses for the different areas of data, you're going to need to prefix your tables with, this is the user table raw data in the bronze layer. So, or bronze users, right? That means you're going to load the data in. You're going to need to transform them. Every project I've ever been on, there's always some level of transformation that's occurring on the data. You're merging something, you're deleting something, you're filtering something. So my opinion here is the bronze layer should be that as close copy of data to whatever the source system is doing, so you can verify that you're at least copying all the data you need into your system. The second part of this is you're going to need some layer of transformation. So either inside that single lakehouse, you're going to pick up those raw tables and you're going to need to transform them slightly. Yeah. And so for that reason, I think a minimum you would need is bronze gold. That's the bare minimum. I mean, and as your company matures, you do more things, you probably will want to have some layer of silver in there in the future, but you don't need it at all times. So I like this question. I think this is great. I think this is just really the community trying to understand and unpack, like, how does this work? And people think that the lake houses and the medallion architecture is so different from what they've been doing traditionally with SQL. And the more I look at it, I'm going, and the more, again, I came from the big data science, the data science realm. So I'm very comfortable with this technology. I like it. I think it serves a lot of needs here. I didn't come from the SQL DBA world. And the more I'm learning about SQL DBAs, there's so many really solid data warehousing concepts that we're just repeating them again inside the lakehouse. It's still data warehousing. It's still the same technology. It's still bring in raw data. It's still stage data. It's still transform it into final tables. None of this has changed. And Donald on the chat here, he's a big advocate for Kimball, right? Kimball is the data warehousing expert, or the guidelines on how you build this stuff. Mm-hmm. There's no change to any of that. All of that stuff still stays the same. There's no difference in lakehouses versus SQL if you're going to be doing a Kimball schema or Kimball principles on top of your data warehousing. It's the same stuff. So for that reason, I don't really think it's that different. I think the terminology has changed. The technology in the hood is different. But at the end of the day, you're still data warehousing. It's still the same stuff. All right, Tommy. With that, I will say thank you very much for listening to the podcast. We've talked a lot about this one. This went very fast yet again. I'm very pleased with the topic here today. Thank you for listening. Our only ask for you is to make sure you share this with somebody else. And don't forget, if you're going to go to the Fabric Conference in Las Vegas, there's a discount code in the description of this video below in case you want to get $200 off your tickets. That can be reused. So if you have multiple team members on your team who also want to get $200 off, feel free to share that with them as well. It'll be in the description of all of our videos. Tommy,
I was going to say, your opportunity to say to both of us to our face, I actively disagree with your statements.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Mike, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to PowerBI.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Again, another Mike gives you a little extra points. Join us Tuesday and Thursday at 7:30 a.m. and join the conversation on all PowerBI.tips social media channels.
Excellent. With that being said, we appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for your time today. We will see you again next time on the podcast. We'll have a recorded episode, I think, coming up next. And then after that, we'll be live again. So that being said, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.